Everybody, Christian and Isaiah from Treasure Town here, and super excited to announce that later tonight as well as tomorrow, and Isaiah's going to take one on MLK Day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be doing some really big whatnot sales.
Yeah, we recently purchased a really big collection out in Texas, so a lot of those items will find their way in that Monday sale.
And so we've had some strength in the U.S. I know me and Spencer have been figuring out how to buy a ton of high quality items to really take our sales to the next level and be a big player. So that's been really fun. I know Isaiah had helped a ton set up a website, and we made our first new website sale, treasuretown.com, which was very fun. We got a $100 grab bag, I think. And then, so the rest of this video, we've been doing a bunch of interesting new ways of doing the lot viewing video where we take like 15 or 20 of the highlights of the auction and do a historical spotlight on those coins. So that's what we'll be doing, everything from interesting US type to ancients to world coins and metals. And then Spencer is going to actually join us for his second ever in-person auction. It's going to be like a premier ancient coin sale. This is, again, Wednesday night. That will start around 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then Isaiah's large sale next Monday is going to feature, high quality. There were Civil War tokens in that big Texas collection he bought. There was a lot of, albums, as he mentioned, but it'll be some pretty neat stuff. So I'm not going to be able to do a sale that following week, so that's why we're jamming the two in here, and then one for Isaiah next week, and we'll be back in action, regular after that, but have taken a minute and a half to get here. Let's take a look at some of the inventory highlights. And let's get started with the lot viewing of some of our top selections, with a lot more to come in, Wednesday and Saturday. But right here we've got a beautiful Pamphylia Aspendus Stater. So Aspendus is the city. It's very well known for its theater, especially by the 2nd century AD when Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, commands a huge theater that had built on its theatrical origins. But again, we have a warrior on the front, you can see, with the shield, the arm, and the standing portrait, as well as this three-legged look on the reverse, chunky silver stater, one of the biggest and earliest Greek denominations for silver. They're often test cut, but this one has been preserved with a lot of original luster, giving it an estimate of above $100. This is a Philip III Aridaeus dram of the Macedonian Empire, which is the Greek Empire. His younger half-brother Alexander the Great had passed away in 323 BC, and he actually had a lot of learning disabilities and was viewed not as somebody who was ruling, but just who was sort of in name reigning, while the Diadochi, which were the generals that were under Alexander the Great, basically fought amongst themselves, and eventually they execute Philip III in 317, marking his end. Eventually Cassander takes over the empire in 305 BC, long after his death, but this has a nice portrait of Hercules on the front of it, and it's probably a $130 or so coin. Here is a beautiful tetradrachm of Antiochus I Soter, which stands for Savior, the son of Seleucus Nicator, which was one of those generals that started the Seleucid Empire. He frequently was fighting against the Ptolemaic Greek kingdom of Egypt, and again emerged. He had the last title of King of the Universe, which was granted to Mesopotamian kings, and this is an elegant, large tetra, meaning 4-dram piece, that I would estimate well over $150 for a coin of this condition, and features Apollo on the reverse of the item. He abandoned Macedonia and Thrace during his reign, but really just tried to consolidate that control and strengthen the Near East, and left some of the further east, like Bactrian kingdoms, to their own rulers. This large tetradrachm is another Seleucid coin from about 100 years later under Demetrius Soter. It has a little bit of delamination on the front of the coin, but he was actually taken hostage by the Romans during his father's reign, Seleucus IV Philopator, and he petitioned Rome to return to rule them, but they didn't want that because they thought he would be too strong. Eventually, in 162 BC or so, he's able to flee, and when he gets back and assumes power, the Romans then support a bunch of other civilizations like the Armenians, the Maccabees, and others like Alexander Balas, who rallies support and eventually defeats Demetrius in about 152 BC. I'd estimate this coin's value solidly over $100, though the delamination may hold it back from achieving super high numbers. This is a Greco-Bactrian dram under Menander I Soter, who was really the peak of that empire's ruler in the mid-2nd century BC. This was to the east of the Parthian and Seleucid empires in modern-day Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, and had capitals of Bactra and Ai-Khanum, which were some of the richest cities in the world at their times. They would stick around until the Indo-Greek kingdoms dissipated around 10 AD, and they had settled since Darius I, the Persian king, with some Greeks there, but it was relatively far out, and eventually a lot of that dissipated. After the Ptolemaic Empire conquers the Seleucid capital of Antioch, and Arsaces of Persia starts the Parthian Empire, they're pretty cut off, and that's the point at which they separate. But Menander Soter was known for his Greco-Buddhism, and this coin is probably worth over $100. This is a 116 to 115 BC, his first regnal year of the Ptolemaic Greek king Ptolemy IX Lathyrus, along with Cleopatra Berenice, and it's a silver tetradrachm minted in modern-day Cyprus. Beautiful coin. Again, a lot of weightier coins in these auctions. We've got an eagle gripping a thunderbolt, which would later be seen on the US $10 gold Indian after Teddy Roosevelt had some comments. But he reigned from 116 to 107, given the throne by his mother, who had the will to decide who would reign after his father and half-brother were murdered. He then was deposed by his mother. He seizes control of Cyprus, and he's able to come back a few years later. A coin like this has a little bit of issues with the planchet and was polished, but is still likely worth a floor of $150. This is a beautiful Roman Republic denarius of 111 BC, which is right around the time that there was a major war going on for the Roman Republic called the Jugurthan War. This had started as the king of Numidia, Jugurtha, had seized authority from the heir apparent, which was Micipsa's sons, and he had ended up killing all of the Roman inhabitants of that North African empire, which had been near Carthage, which was the Carthaginians were, of course, at odds with the Romans in a big way. And so this was during that conflict. It has a triga, or three-horsed chariot, being driven, and was struck by Appius Claudius Pulcher and Q. Urbinius as the moneyers. Beautiful coin. I would think retail it's going to be well above $100. Fast forward 25 years. This coin is a coin struck in 85 BC. It's a denarius with the head of Apollo on the front of the coin and a fast quadriga four-horse chariot on the reverse. It's a time of political and social upheavals as Rome is fighting its Italian allies, the Soci, who wanted Roman citizenship and equal rights, which they eventually got. In 87 BC, they saw Lucius Cornelius Sulla march his army on Rome with Gaius Marius opposing him. However, he then goes and fights King Mithridates VI of Pontus in the Turkey area. Marius seizes power in Rome, and the sullen civil wars in 83 BC occur when he comes back to Rome only to find that his political rival had seized control. This is in that time right before the first dictatorship, and this coin is worth over $100. This is a thick metal of Pope Paul II, who was the 211th pope from 1464 to 1471, who was often criticized for his significant nepotism. He had a pretty authoritarian style and strengthened the nobility of the papacy, conflicting with the local aristocracy as he tried to seize that power, and really what he ended up doing, though, was commissioning a lot of building projects in Rome, including the Basilica di Santa Maria, and eventually dies and is succeeded by Pope Sixtus IV. It's interesting how much turnover there is among the papal entities at that point. This coin or metal is probably struck a little bit after the 1400s, but has a very old style with a high relief and is a great piece of numismatic history. This is a 1608 Philip III Atocha shipwreck 2 real coin, and with these items it's extremely important to have the provenance and the authenticity which this flip achieves. This would have been minted at Potosi in Bolivia, as evidenced by the cross style as opposed to Mexico City, and would have been discovered by treasure hunter Mel Fisher in what was the most valuable shipwreck find ever. Many people died in the search for this treasure from a Spanish galleon called Nuestra Señora de Atocha that had sailed from the New World to Spain, was hit by a hurricane, and sank in 1622, leaving 40 tons of gold and silver at the bottom of the ocean. This coin would have been, again, the 2 real would have been 1/4 of the 8 real, and that was the dominant denomination of silver coins that were inspired, and we'll talk about that soon, by the Austrian thalers. Great item, retail value in excess of $700. As the Spanish history evolved, this is a coin of King Charles III, who reigned from 1759 to 1788 and was a proponent of enlightened absolutism, essentially the thought that there should be freedom of speech and press, private property, and religious tolerance in a king-ruled civilization. He seized the kingdom of Naples and Sicily at only 18 years of age, that's 5 years younger than me, and married Maria Amalia, a Polish princess, and they had 13 children. Historian Stanley Payne views him as one of the most successful rulers of his time in Europe. He had abdicated to respect the Treaty of Vienna in Naples and Sicily once he assumed control in Spain, and the rivalry with Britain led him to support the American revolutionaries despite concern for the precedent on what would happen to Spanish overseas territories. This coin is also a 2 reals much later, though, and has the Spanish emblem on the reverse of it, and would have been minted in Lima, Peru, as evidenced by the MAE mint mark, and was part of his vast Spanish colonial empire. Here is a large Spanish 8 reals coin, 1798, struck for King Charles IV. Charles IV was a ruler reigning from about 1788 to 1808 before Napoleon Bonaparte had taken control after there were some issues with Prince Ferdinand, his son, who unsuccessfully formed a coup in 1807 at first, and then successfully did one at 1808, before I believe it was Joseph Bonaparte who was able to get into control. Charles IV was viewed as a do-nothing king, with his wife taking other lovers and the economic power that had been built up for so long collapsing as France, who was an ally, pursued wars that proved very costly for the empire, and combined with Charles IV's weak reign, really brought the Spanish to a tougher situation. This 8 reals coin, however, is viewed as, again, the main coin and the money standard around the world since its inception in Mexico in the 1530s, all the way up to the 1850s, inspired by the Austrian thaler. Moving to some of the US coinage, this is a cap bust $50. We started striking coins federally in 1792, and engraver of the mint, I believe it was the second one after Robert Scott, William Neese commissioned these designs, which lasted for around 20 to 30 years before Gobrecht commissioned the seated coinage. They often featured on the $50's lettered edge, though this one's relatively worn. Larger diameter sizes on the $50 from 1807 to 1836, and the smaller diameter reeded edge type continued through 1839. There's a lot of contemporary counterfeit $50 that are actively collected, as well as the selective Bust Half Nut Club, which is a collector society around these pieces, and this one should range in the $50 to $70 range. Right here we have the obese king, King Louis XVIII, who was the king of France after Napoleon. He was exiled for 23 years when the French Revolution occurred in 1791, as well as during the 100 Days, the time that Napoleon had arrived back from exile in 1815. He was the brother of King Louis XVI. 17th had died in prison, and he was able to proclaim himself king, though he was away from the throne. The new constitution that France had put in place post-Napoleon weakened him significantly, and he also held the title of the last king to die while reigning, as Charles X, who came after him, abdicated while the later kings were deposed. He was again very overweight and struggled to have children, dying from gout and gangrene at a relatively early age. The coin is 90% silver and would have been minted in Toulouse, which I believe is an area of southern France. Here's a very topical coin. This is an 1838 British and British Guinea one-stiver coin, which features the trade and navigation slogan. British Guinea was one of the colonies in the north of South America that Britain had attempted to establish, along other ones such as Demerary, Essequibo, and later this. There were some conflicts with the Dutch, who had settled the area first, but after the Treaty of Paris, they solidified control and later had border disputes with Venezuela and Suriname, literally which are continuing today as Venezuela attempts to annex some of Guinea. This coin is one of the lower value ones in this lot viewing, but I think a really interesting token and a great piece of South American history. An incredible half dollar of New Orleans, this 1854 seated half dollar features some arrows alongside the seated Liberty design. Those arrows reflected the California gold rush, which meant that there was tons of gold entering America to the point that $1 of silver coins could buy about $1.06 of gold coins. This led to tons of coins being melted down to turn into silver bars to trade for gold, which would then be exchanged back to US silver to repeat the process. It led to a huge small change shortage, and they reduced the weight in these coins, added the arrows to signify that, and were able to relieve that issue to some degree. But there was still a lot of coin hoarding going on in the United States. When they later increased the weights to match some of the global standards, they would add arrows back in the early 1870s. But this coin probably starts in the $50 range, reflecting the started in 1838 New Orleans mint on the reverse. This beautiful 1870 Sol coin is a Peruvian item that was struck during a time of a lot of issues for the Peruvian nation. They were in the post-Guano era, which had occurred from about 1845 to 1866 under Ramon Castilla. There was some turnover after the Echenique was in power from 1851, but he was re-ousted by Castilla, and they exported that guano, or bird excrement, which was used as a fertilizer among a range of purposes, and that was able to settle or erase some of the national debt. Once the guano ran out, they saw huge drops in exports and crumbled in the years to come, but this coin probably starts again in the $50 range and is struck out of a nice 90% silver in Lima, Peru. Here is a highly interesting and historic British trade dollar from 1897, which were produced after the need was realized for British merchants to trade and transact in the Orient without relying on the supply of foreign silver. This would have showed Britannia's specific portrait standing with a helmet for the first time, and was the same specification as the Spanish dollar, but for the British. This became a commonly circulating coin throughout China at that point, and featured some of the characters in both Chinese and Jawi Malay on the reverse, as well as the Chinese symbol for longevity in the center. This coin has had some chop marks or counter marks, which were used to test the purity and make sure that it was authentic, and also retains some very pleasing original luster. This coin, I would be surprised if it sold for less than $90. It might range a good bit higher than that. Speaking of high-end coins, here we have an 1863 Japan Akita province 9 momme 2 bu. In the 1860s, Japan was undergoing a very large change as the ruling shogun was overthrown, the Tokugawa shogunate, in favor of Emperor Mutsuhito. He chose the name Meiji, which you're likely familiar with, for enlightened reign, and his slogan, or the slogan of his supporters, was rich country, strong military. They modernized the country massively, but this would have been struck under the previous rule just a few years earlier as Commodore Perry and the Western world was disrupting Japan significantly. This coin, again, is minted in Akita, northwestern Japan, and was one of the largest circulating items that's been produced. It has a beautiful wavy planchet, and while this one does have a cleaned AU detail, grade is a very pleasing coin for a collector that's probably going to start in the $800 to $900 range. This is an early 1900s South African Orange Free State celluloid shilling token reflecting the British monetary system as well as some of the Dutch lettering for the Harding and Parker Limited Company. Celluloid, again, is pre-plastic material, and the rumor is that these would have been struck all the way in Japan for use in South Africa, but the Orange Free State was a Boer republic in that country during the 19th and 20th centuries, resulting from the mass migration of Boers, the Dutch settlers, who tried to escape British rule during the Great Trek. That would have been from the Cape Colony in the 1830s, and the province would have been named for the Orange River, which flows through the region, though it was annexed back in 1900 during the Second Anglo-Boer War. This is also a lower value item relative to the others in today's sale, but super interesting. Here we have a highly significant US coin, the 1909S repunched mint mark Phoebus Stanton 1502 designation, but this features Lincoln, who would have been the first person on a circulating US coin, his memorial 100th anniversary of his birth. They changed that, of course, in 1959 and 200 years later in 2009 for some of the other important memorials, but the San Francisco Mint struck considerably less than the Philadelphia Mint, which didn't have a mint mark, making these highly sought after coins. And with the additional repunching, where they were unable to punch the mint mark properly first and required another punch, makes this even more valuable, likely starting around $100, but with a good condition and very interesting history in addition to a mint variety. And I'm realizing that unfortunately this is probably the best way. I don't think I'll be able to do specific items, but there's going to be some high quality Civil War tokens, a ton of albums as Isaiah mentioned, and a great show that will be starting tonight in probably around an hour, as well as tomorrow with Spencer, some of those high quality ancients that I mentioned, plus a ton of new additions. But this coin is a 1964 Kennedy $half with some toning on it, just as a representative of some of the US coins, but this coin features Kennedy, who would have been assassinated just a little bit earlier in 1963, and the Kennedy $half would have been struck in 90% silver but was immediately hoarded by collectors, which is why we have so many in nice condition today. Additionally, there were a massive run-up in the price of silver in the wake of this being struck, meaning that the next year would see the silver content reduced to 40% and phased out by 1971. They stopped using these much in circulation by the end of the 70s and removed them and made them not intended for circulation by 2001, but they brought them back in 2021. So it's interesting to see how the legacy of the Kennedy $half will continue to evolve. And it's a little bit more secretive than normal, but that's basically it for today. We've got lots of interesting Israeli metals. We've got lots of interesting coins that I just showed you, and about 600 or so lots and individual ones for tonight. 200 in the Elite Premier sale tomorrow night, which you should go check. We've got a list of some of the ones that we've selected up already. And then Isaiah's MLK Mega Sale starting at 4 p.m. Eastern Time next Monday. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to head on over to treasuretown.com and sign up for our email list to stay up to date on everything that's happening, whether it's auction updates, exciting new inventory drops, coin collecting news, or general informational resources. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on another one.